My mom works at NASA. That's all she said, just 6 words, but they lit a spark in the room like someone had dropped a firecracker into a library. It started with a pause, a heavy, uncomfortable beat of silence that stretched just a little too long. Then came the snickers. One kid at the back let out an exaggerated cough laugh. Another nudged the girl next to him and whispered something that made her cover her mouth and giggle. The laughter didn't come all at once. It spread like a slow wave, building, rolling from desk to desk, growing louder and looser with every second. It wasn't the loud kind of laughter that means someone told a good joke. It was the disbelieving kind, the kind that strips dignity from a sentence and turns it into a punchline. Arya stood frozen in the center of it, her index card trembling just slightly in her hand. She had written her notes in purple pen the night before, practicing in front of her mirror while her mom cooked dinner just a few feet away. She hadn't expected applause, but she hadn't expected this either. She looked at her teacher, Miss Parker, hoping for something, maybe a gesture, maybe a pause to let the room reset, but all she got was a tight-lipped smile and a quick, "Thank you, Arya," as if moving on was the solution. The moment had landed and cracked open, and no one was reaching in to fix it. She returned to her seat slowly, aware of every eye on her, even the ones pretending not to stare. Her desk felt colder than it had a few minutes before. She kept her hands in her lap and stared at the wood grain, tracing imaginary lines to keep herself grounded. A few more students went after her, but she barely heard what they said. Something about a bakery, something else about a dad who fixed cars. She didn't care. Her stomach felt tight, like it had curled into a fist. She didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of the same kids who had just laughed at the idea that someone like her could belong to something bigger. It wasn't just the NASA part that made them laugh. She could feel it in her skin. It was her. A brown girl with scuffed sneakers, sitting in a second-hand hoodie, saying something that felt too big for the way they saw her. To them, NASA wasn't a workplace. It was a fantasy. And she, clearly, was not the kind of person who belonged inside one. The teasing didn't stop when the presentations ended. It turned into whispers, past notes, sideways glances. Someone slipped a torn piece of paper onto her desk that said, "Janitor, maybe? LOL." She didn't react, not visibly, but something inside her settled into silence, the kind that hides away because it's tired of not being heard. Her mom had told her once that people would doubt her, not because she wasn't good enough, but because they couldn't see past their own limits. She had nodded then, like she understood. But this felt different. This was humiliation, and it stung worse because she'd told the truth. By the time the bell rang for dismissal, most kids were already halfway out the door. Arya stayed in her seat. Her backpack was zipped, her papers stacked neatly. She had everything ready, but she didn't move. She stared at the classroom door, hoping for something she couldn't name. Maybe a rewind, maybe a redo. Anything but this lingering sense that she'd just made herself small in front of people who had already decided who she was. When she finally stood up, her legs felt shaky. The halls were loud with chatter and laughter, but it all sounded far away. The kind of far away that makes you feel like a background character in your own story. That night, when she came home, the first thing she did was kick off her shoes a little too hard. They landed by the door with a thud. Her mom was in the kitchen, humming softly while stirring something fragrant in a deep ceramic pot. The smell should have felt warm, comforting. It didn't. Arya dragged her backpack to the table and sat down without a word. She didn't touch the water her mom had set out. Didn't look up until her name was called for the second time. "You're quiet," her mom said, not accusing, just noticing. Arya shrugged, keeping her eyes on the table. There were little bits of rice stuck to the wood from the night before. She began peeling them off one by one with her fingernail. "Something happen at school?" There was a long pause before she answered, and when she did, her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "They laughed at me." Her mom didn't move, didn't say anything right away. She just stood there, spoon in hand, heat rising behind her from the stove, waiting. "I told them what you do, that you work at NASA, and they laughed like it was a joke. One kid even asked if you cleaned the building." Arya didn't raise her voice, didn't cry. She just said the words like they were facts. Her mom finally turned off the burner. The bubbling stopped. She walked over, sat across from her daughter, and looked her in the eye. "And what did you say when they laughed?" Arya hesitated. "Nothing. Miss Parker moved on so fast, I didn't even get to explain." There was no sigh, no dramatic speech, just a soft, firm voice that said, "You didn't say anything wrong. That's their smallness talking, not your mistake." Arya looked up. Her eyes were red but dry. "Then why did it feel like I did?" Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "Because it hurts to be doubted when you're telling the truth. But remember, truth doesn't change just because someone's too limited to recognize it. You don't need their permission to be proud of what you come from." The words didn't fix everything, not right away, but they settled in the air like armor. They sat like that for a while, the food still warm on the stove, the house quiet around them. And even though Arya still felt small in that moment, a seed had been planted, one that would grow into something steady and strong, something she didn't know yet, but her mother did. And soon, so would everyone else. Arya sat at the kitchen table that night, her food barely touched. The stew her mom made, one of her favorites, smelled rich with garlic and cumin, but the ache in her stomach drowned out the hunger. She kept picking at her sleeve, wrapping the frayed cuff around her finger, unwrapping it, then wrapping it again. Her mother, Dr. Eliana Brooks, didn't push her to eat. She just watched quietly for a while, waiting, letting the silence open up space for Arya to speak. When the words finally came, they came in pieces. Arya said, "It's just, why didn't they believe me?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, defeated in the way that only a child can be after realizing the world isn't as fair as she was told. Her mother leaned back in her chair, hands folded gently on the table. She didn't give the easy answers. That wasn't her way. "Do you want to know something?" she said, her voice even. "When I was 17, my guidance counselor looked me dead in the eye and told me to be realistic. I had just said I wanted to go into aerospace engineering. She told me secretarial work might be a better fit." Arya blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope." I didn't argue. I just stopped going to her office. I figured if she couldn't see it, it wasn't my job to make her look harder. Eliana's tone wasn't bitter. It was steady, like she had told the story before, but never to her daughter. "You know how many people told me no along the way? Professors, classmates, even people in my own family. They didn't say it outright, but you could feel it in the way they blinked too fast when I spoke. Like the words I was saying didn't match the person they saw." Arya stared at her mom, not just as her mom now, but as a person who had been through something big, something she hadn't known about. "Did it ever make you want to quit?" Eliana gave a tiny shrug, more like a breath than a motion. "Sometimes, not because I couldn't do it, but because it's exhausting having to prove yourself every day. It wears on you, especially when you know you're qualified and still treated like a maybe." They sat in that stillness for a while, two versions of the same story, one further down the path, one just beginning. Then her mom said something that made Arya sit up a little straighter. "I could come to your class Friday if you want. It's still Parent Day, right?" Arya's eyes flickered with hesitation. "Really? You'd do that?" Eliana nodded. "I have the day off. Might be good for them to see what NASA actually looks like." Arya chewed her lip. "What would you even wear?" Her mother smirked. "I was thinking, my badge. Maybe that blazer you hate." That made Arya laugh for the first time all evening. A small surprise sound, but real. The kind that slips out before your brain tells it not to. "Yeah," she said. "Okay, do that." The idea of it, the image of her mom walking in, badge swinging, blazer sharp, felt like a spark of electricity in Arya's chest. Not revenge, not payback. Just truth walking into the room, unbothered and unafraid. Friday crept up faster than she expected. The whole week, Arya didn't say a word to anyone about what was coming. She wanted the moment to be hers, untouched by whispers or warnings. Whispers still floated around the classroom, but they were quieter now, more cautious. One kid who had laughed the loudest offered her a crumpled fruit snack during lunch. Another said, "I was just joking," without making eye contact. Arya didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. The bell rang on Friday morning with an extra edge in the air. Everyone was buzzing, jittery with the energy of an event. Parent Day meant cookies on a tray, store-bought and too sweet. It meant rearranged desks, awkward introductions, and kids pretending they weren't watching their classmates' parents too closely. The first few arrived around 9:15, a dad in a mechanic's jumpsuit, a mom in scrubs. Another parent carried a Starbucks cup and wore a too big smile-like armor. They stood near the whiteboard, taking turns talking about fixing cars, bandaging scrapes, running yoga classes. Arya listened, but only halfway. Her eyes kept flicking to the door, not in panic, just in waiting. And then, without warning, it opened. Dr. Eliana Brooks stepped into the room. She didn't speak right away. She didn't have to. The room shifted before a word left her mouth. She walked with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove anything. Her hair was pulled back, neat and simple. Her blazer was sharp, that same one Arya always said looked too stiff, and around her neck hung her NASA badge, clipped to a lanyard that read Johnson Space Center. She wasn't wearing anything flashy, no jewelry except her watch, no heels, no makeup, but she looked like someone who belonged everywhere. The room went quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels forced or polite, the kind that falls when something unexpected but important is happening. Even Miss Parker fumbled her words. Everyone, this is..." She paused, looking at Arya. Arya stood up slowly. Her voice didn't shake. "This is my mom, Dr. Eliana Brooks." She didn't add anything else. She didn't need to. Her mother nodded, stepped forward, and smiled at the room. Not wide, not fake, just enough to say, "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I'm an aerospace systems engineer at NASA. I help design and manage mission strategies for spacecraft, both satellites and human missions." A few kids blinked. One girl leaned forward like she hadn't heard correctly. Arya caught a glimpse of Theo, the one who made the janitor joke. His mouth was open just slightly, like he was waiting for a punchline that never came. "I work with a team that figures out how to keep astronauts safe while they're orbiting Earth, or on their way to the Moon or Mars. We look at everything from fuel systems to how oxygen flows through a cabin." She paused. "Let it sink in. It's not always glamorous work, but it's precise. It matters." The room stayed still. No whispering now, no snickers. Then she added, "I came today not just to share what I do, but because my daughter told you earlier this week, and some of you laughed." She didn't say it with anger, just honesty. That moment, it wasn't about me. It was about what you thought someone like her could be connected to, and that's worth talking about. No one moved. No one interrupted. Dr. Brooks stepped toward the board, pulled a folded printout from her bag, and held it up. "This is one of the schematics I worked on last year. You don't have to understand all of it. That's not the point. The point is, just because something sounds extraordinary doesn't mean it's impossible. Sometimes you just haven't seen it before." She turned and looked at them. "And next time someone tells you something that surprises you, pause, think, ask questions, but don't laugh just because you can't imagine it yet." She stepped back, handed the printout to a wide-eyed student in the front row, and walked toward Arya's desk. The classroom felt different now, like the floor had shifted slightly beneath everyone's feet. She took the empty seat beside her daughter, and for the first time all week, Arya exhaled fully. She didn't grin, didn't need to, The room had already seen everything it needed to. When Dr. Brooks finished speaking, the room didn't burst into applause or erupt with cheers. That would have been too easy. Instead, something quieter and maybe more powerful happened. The silence didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt full, like everyone was still trying to catch up to what they'd just witnessed. A few students leaned back in their seats slowly, like they were processing in real time. One boy who had joked earlier now couldn't stop looking at the diagram Dr. Brooks had handed out. His fingers hovered above the paper like he was afraid to wrinkle it. Even Miss Parker, who had been so quick to move on earlier in the week, kept glancing at Arya with something new in her expression. Not pity, not surprise, something closer to recognition, something that said, "I should have known better." When the next parent stood up, someone's dad talking about car sales and customer service, his voice felt almost too loud for the room. He spoke quickly, rushed through a half-funny story about a customer who'd tried to drive off without paying, but the class barely responded. No one laughed. Not because it wasn't a good story, but because their minds were still in orbit, still picturing lunar missions and oxygen flow and the words aerospace systems engineer echoing in the corners of their memory. Arya sat with her back straight, her shoes firmly planted on the floor and her hands resting calmly in her lap. She didn't smile wide. She didn't gloat. She just existed, solid, seen and finally understood. She could feel the difference in the air. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. For once she wasn't the girl they questioned. She was the girl who told the truth. And the evidence had just walked in wearing a NASA badge and a black blazer. When the final bell rang that afternoon, kids filed out with their usual chaos, talking over each other, grabbing their backpacks, comparing notes on who brought what kind of lunch. But even in the noise, there was a difference. No one bumped Arya's desk on the way out. No one whispered her name under their breath. Theo, the one who made the janitor comment, paused near the door. His eyes flicked toward her, but he didn't say anything. He just looked, like someone trying to rewrite a mental image and failing to figure out where to start. The next week began like any other, with morning announcements and spelling tests and half-eaten breakfast bars left in coat pockets. But for Arya, something had shifted, not just in the room, but inside her. She no longer lowered her voice when she spoke in class. She no longer hesitated before raising her hand. She didn't need to impress anyone, didn't feel the urge to prove herself in every sentence. The need for permission had quietly evaporated. During science on Tuesday, when Miss Parker asked a question about how satellites maintain orbit, Arya didn't wait for someone else to answer first. She raised her hand. She got it half right, then corrected herself without embarrassment. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. The room let her speak. That, more than anything, felt like progress. At recess later that week, two girls, Kennedy and Samira, wandered over to where Arya sat on the bench by the fence, sketching something in the corner of her notebook. For a minute, they didn't say anything. Just stood there, shifting weight from one foot to the other. Finally, Kennedy cleared her throat. "My mom said your mom's speech was really something," she said, chewing nervously on her bottom lip. She sounded smart, like really smart. Arya nodded without looking up. "She is." Samira stepped closer. "I looked up NASA stuff after school. It's actually kinda cool." There wasn't a big apology, no long-winded explanation, just those two sentences, but the girls didn't walk away after. They sat beside her, and the three of them started talking. Not about what happened, just about the drawing Arya was working on, about what kind of pen she used, about space. Inside the classroom, Miss Parker had changed, too, if only slightly. She called on Arya more frequently, listened with more attention. She hadn't apologized, not yet, but the tight smiles were gone, replaced with something more open, something that suggested she had gone home and thought about what she'd let happen. And though Arya wasn't looking for validation, it still mattered. It mattered that someone had noticed what they'd missed the first time, On Thursday, Miss Parker asked for a few students to stay back and help with a bulletin board project. When Aria volunteered, Miss Parker didn't just say thank you. She smiled with genuine warmth and said, "I'm glad you're here." And Aria could tell it wasn't just because she needed extra hands. It was an attempt at something. Maybe not a full circle, but a new line drawn in the right direction. Still, not everyone had changed. Some kids stayed the same. The boy who whispered "NASA kid" every time she passed her desk still muttered it under his breath, as if trying to chip away at what had shifted. He didn't say it loud, just loud enough to hear. But now, Aria didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She didn't even look his way. She had realized something important. Being doubted didn't make her smaller, only responding to it did. On Friday, during group projects, a boy in her row whispered to someone beside him, "She thinks she's better than us." Aria didn't even hesitate. She turned her head and replied, calm and clear, "No, I just know I belong here." There was no comeback, no eye roll, just a pause, and after that, silence. The kind of silence that lets something new take root. That afternoon at home, Eliana noticed it too. The way her daughter walked into the house without slumping her shoulders. The way she started humming while washing her hands. The tune soft but sure. At dinner, Aria talked more than usual. Not in stories that begged for attention, just little moments. A question she got right. A new thing she learned. The kind of things you only say out loud when you're starting to believe you deserve to take up space. Later that night, after dishes were done and the lights were dim, Eliana found a sticky note on the fridge. A small square of paper written in blocky blue ink. "I'm going to work there too." No punctuation, no name. Just one sentence and a heart drawn in the corner. She didn't move it. She didn't even tell Aria she'd seen it. She just left it right where it was, next to the shopping list, a quiet promise tucked into the corner of a home that had always known the truth. On Sunday morning, before anyone else in the neighborhood was awake, Aria sat cross-legged on the living room rug with a pencil in one hand and a stack of printer paper beside her. The TV was off. Her phone was somewhere in her backpack, untouched. She wasn't doodling flowers or cartoon characters like she used to. These drawings had structure, edges, functions, shapes that had purpose. On the page in front of her was a satellite, only half finished, with wide, curved solar panels stretching out like petals. She erased a section slowly, carefully redrew a line, then shaded it in with the side of her pencil. Each time she made a mark, she paused to think, not about whether someone would like it, just whether it made sense, whether it could work. Later that day, her mom passed through the room on her way to the laundry, slowed at the doorway, and just watched for a few seconds. Aria didn't notice at first. She was too deep inside the design, but when she did look up, she smiled, not a grin, but the kind of smile that said, "I know who I am now." Her mother stepped closer, nodded toward the sketch and said, "Tell me what it does." Aria straightened the page a bit, tapped the top edge with her finger. "So this is a satellite that turns depending on where the sun is, but instead of keeping the panels flat, they open and move like this." She moved her hands in a slow circular motion, mimicking a blooming flower. "I thought maybe that way it could get more energy without overheating the center." Eliana raised her eyebrows, genuinely impressed. "That's smart. Where'd you get that idea?" Aria shrugged. "Sunflowers. I was thinking about how they move to follow the light. I don't know. It just came to me." Eliana sat beside her on the rug, not even minding the laundry waiting behind her. "That's how the best ideas start," she said. "Not from trying to impress someone, from trying to solve something that hasn't been solved yet." They sat quietly for a while, the sketch between them like a shared language. It wasn't about NASA now. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about building something because it made sense, because it felt right. Aria glanced up after a moment and asked, "Do you think the kids really believed me after you left?" Her mom didn't answer right away. She tilted her head thinking. Some did, some still don't, and some might never. But that's not your job to fix. Arya frowned slightly. So what do I do? Her mother smiled, not with pity, but with pride. You keep showing up. That's the hard part. Not just once, but every time. You speak your truth even when it feels like no one hears it. Arya looked back down at her drawing, tracing the solar panels again with her pencil. Like you did? Like I still do, her mom said softly. Every day. She sat back, leaned her head against the wall, and let out a quiet sigh, the kind that releases a little of the weight she still carries. Was it always this hard? Arya asked. Eliana looked at her daughter, saw the layers of understanding beginning to stack behind her eyes. Sometimes harder, she said, but I stopped waiting for it to get easy. That's not how this works. Arya nodded, more to herself than anyone. There was something grounding about hearing it, like the difficulty wasn't a failure, but a path, a real one. That evening, when dinner was done and the dishes were dry, Arya pulled a small magnet off the fridge, pinned her satellite sketch right next to the grocery list, and walked away without saying a word. Her mother didn't move it, didn't frame it, or make it into a big deal. She just looked at it each time she passed and smiled in her own quiet way. Not every victory needs applause. Some just need space. The following Monday, the school felt different. Not in a dramatic, sweeping change kind of way, more like something subtle had shifted under the surface. Arya walked into class and didn't brace for the usual jokes or whispers. No one clapped when she entered. No one greeted her with a grand apology, but the stares were softer. The comments, if they existed at all, were said far more carefully. Even Theo avoided her eyes, and that was something. Miss Parker pulled her aside that afternoon while the rest of the class packed up for dismissal. "I wanted to say something," she said, her voice lower than usual. Arya looked up, wary but curious. "About last week, when you gave your presentation," she paused. "I should have asked more questions. I should have given you more space to finish. I moved on too fast and... I'm sorry." Arya blinked. It was the first time she'd heard an adult apologize like that. No excuses, just the truth. She nodded once, not too fast, just enough. "Thank you," she said, and that was all that needed to be said. For now. Not everyone had changed, though. There were still kids who muttered when they thought no one was listening. Still looks that lingered a beat too long, like someone waiting for her to trip. Like the truth they'd seen the week before couldn't quite erase the expectations they'd built in their heads. One boy, Dean, still called her NASA Kid when he thought she couldn't hear. Said it like a nickname, but with a twist of sarcasm, as if he was trying to chip away at something that now seemed too strong to break all at once. But Arya had changed. That was the difference. She didn't flinch. She didn't snap back. She just kept doing the work. She raised her hand even when she wasn't sure. She asked harder questions in science, stayed after class once to talk to Miss Parker about extra materials. And little by little, the room began to shift around her, not fast, not loud, but steady, quietly powerful. One afternoon, while working on a group activity about ecosystems, Arya overheard another student whisper, "She thinks she's smarter than everyone." She looked up, didn't raise her voice, didn't even blink. She said, calm as the sky before a storm, "No, I just know I belong here." There was no rebuttal. No one laughed. The conversation ended right there. At home, her mother noticed the change too, not just in posture or tone, but in the way Arya spoke during dinner. More detail, more spark. She started talking about things again, not because she needed approval, but because she wanted to share. She drew more often, and not just satellites now. Helmets, space pods, capsule modules with little labels scribbled beside them. She started sticking them to the fridge, one by one. By the end of the month, half of it was covered. Then, one morning during announcements, Miss Parker held up a new submission for the Career Dreams bulletin board. "This one is from Arya," she said, and for a moment the class held its breath. She wrote, I want to build machines that go to places no person has ever been, because someone has to figure out how to get us there. And I think I can." She didn't read it with sarcasm. She read it slowly, clearly, respectfully. And when she was done, no one laughed. A few kids turned in their seats to glance at Arya, not with disbelief this time, but something else, something closer to respect. Arya didn't look up. She didn't need to. She kept her head down, drawing in the corner of her notebook. A small gear, a connecting arm, maybe a new design idea. She wasn't trying to be seen anymore. She just knew she was, and that was enough. Because this story had never been about applause. It had always been about truth, about what it means to say something honest when the world's already decided not to believe you, about how showing up again and again can be louder than any shout, and about how one voice, even if it starts small, can still change the way a room listens.